Welcome to This Explainer. You know, whenever we start talking about public finance or government budgets, we almost always fixate on taxes, right? We focus on what's being taken out of our paychecks. But here's the thing, taxes are just the fuel. The actual engine of a functional society, the whole reason they collect that money in the first place, is public expenditure. So today, we're going to flip the script. We're looking at exactly where that money goes, how it's categorized, and why it actually matters to you.
So it's the million-dollar, or I guess more accurately, the multi-trillion-dollar question, why do governments spend so much of our money? It is so easy to look at a national budget and just feel totally disconnected from those mind-boggling numbers. But every single dollar, pound, or rupee spent, that represents a deliberate choice about how our society operates. We're taking a journey today, going from the massive, macro-level philosophies of what a government should do, all the way down to the micro-level accounting of how they actually pay for it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover the 7 core objectives of public expenditure. Then, we'll look at how we classify government spending. And finally, we'll explore why public spending just consistently seems to grow.
All right, Section 1, the 7 core objectives of public expenditure. Think of me as your public finance teacher for the next few minutes, because before we look at the spreadsheets, we really need to understand the fundamental philosophy here, like why must a government spend money at all? So here's the big picture, the 7 core objectives. As you can see, they range from the absolute bare-bones basics of survival, like keeping internal peace, all the way to really complex social engineering and economic management. Let's actually break these down with some real-world examples. The first 2 objectives are all about safety. Objective 1 is ensuring internal peace and discipline. I mean, it is the primary duty of any government to keep its citizens safe and just maintain basic order. In the real world, this means funding your local police stations, the courts, emergency responder forces, and that requires some serious expenditure. Now, Objective 2 is protecting the country from external enemies. Nations spend heavily on defense security forces, armies, navies, border patrols, to protect national freedom, sovereignty, and borders from outside threats. Basically, physical safety, both inside and out, is a massive ongoing investment. Moving on, we've got official expenditure and economic development. Objective 3, official expenditure, is basically the administrative overhead of running a country. A government has to hire civil service employees just to keep the lights on and the offices running smoothly, from the DMV to the tax authorities. That means paying substantial sums in salaries. Then, Objective 4 is economic development. This is where the government directly participates in funding national growth projects. Think about building massive new highways, funding space programs, or investing in next-generation green energy grids. Objectives 5 and 6 build into much broader societal goals. Objective 5 is economic stability. The government basically uses its spending like a giant thermostat. So when the country faces high inflation, the government might reduce expenditure to kind of cool things down. But during a deflationary period or a recession, they might pump money into the economy to keep prices and jobs stable. Now, contrast that sort of mechanical adjustment with Objective 6. Social welfare. This is funding public welfare activities like public parks, sanitation, community centers, all based on the idea that people are the center of all national development. And that brings us to our 7th and final core objective, the fair distribution of income and assets. Look, modern economies can naturally create an unequal distribution of wealth. To address this, governments use public expenditure as a structural mechanism to try and balance out societal resources. It involves collecting money through things like income and property taxes from high earners, and then using those revenues to fund support programs, housing, or food assistance for the poor. The goal here is removing extreme wealth discrimination. All right, moving to Section 2, classifying government spending. We've talked about the why, so now let's look at the how governments actually categorize all that money. Governments basically split their checkbooks into 2 broad categories, revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. Let's use a household analogy here. Revenue expenditure is a lot like paying your monthly grocery or utility bill. It's recurring, it happens regularly, and it pays for current needs, like civil administration or keeping the defense forces running. Crucially, it doesn't create a new asset. Capital expenditure, on the flip side, is like buying a house or maybe a new tractor. It's a non-recurring investment that creates a long-term asset, like building a dam, a steel plant, or a brand new hospital. Historically, you'd also see spending split into developmental and non-developmental. Developmental spending was for tangible economic progress, like transport and communication. Non-developmental was just for general administration.
But here is the really crucial point about how this has evolved. Until pretty recently, spending on education and health was considered non-developmental, just because it didn't build a physical factory or a road. But modern economic thinking has completely shifted on this. We now realize that investing in people's minds and health builds human capital, which absolutely drives economic growth. So today, education and public health are firmly categorized as developmental.
You might also run into the terms productive and unproductive expenditure. Productive expenditures improve the economic capacity of the country, like investing in machinery or worker training. Unproductive expenditures are pure consumption that don't add to productive efficiency. Think of the costs of running the justice system or general administration. But let me be very, very clear here. Unproductive absolutely does not mean wasteful. I mean, maintaining law and order is fundamentally essential for a society to even exist. It just doesn't produce a direct financial return on a spreadsheet, that's all. Which brings us to Section 3, why public spending grows. Because if you look at historical government budgets, they really seem to only go in one direction, up. Let's look at why. First up, the political causes. Honestly, the very structure of a democratic welfare state is just inherently more expensive than a totalitarian regime. Democracies require regular elections, and those are costly. Ruling parties have to fulfill campaign promises and launch new programs to persuade public opinion, which naturally means providing new amenities to the people. On top of that, we live in a world of really uncertain international politics. That constant fear of conflict forces nations to continuously upgrade and expand their defense capabilities just to feel secure. And this brilliantly illustrates the scale of that change. Just look at this massive leap in India's defense expenditure. Back in 1980 to 81, it was roughly 3,278 crore rupees. Fast forward to 2015 to 16, and that bar absolutely explodes to over 143,000 crore rupees. It's serious visual shock value, right? It just goes to show how much external insecurity drives massive budgetary expansion over just a few decades. Then we have the social causes. The absolute simplest factor here is population growth. More people just means more responsibilities for the state. But it is also about expectations. Modern governments are expected to be welfare states. Citizens today expect generalized social services, clean water, sanitation, specialized departments for child and labor welfare. Furthermore, there's this broad modern expectation of social security. That means governments are spending huge amounts on old age pensions, sickness benefits, and free medical services to ensure a baseline standard of living for everyone. Finally, let's quickly run through the economic drivers. First, inflation. Just like a regular consumer at the grocery store, governments get hit hard by rising prices. They have to spend more money just to provide the exact same level of goods and services, not to mention increasing salaries for public employees so they can keep up with the cost of living. Budgets also swell because of the expansion of the public sector, increased economic assistance or subsidies given to private enterprises to encourage development, and, of course, the growing trend of urbanization. To really grasp the momentum of public sector growth, take a look at India's 5-year plans. The outlay during the very first plan was 1,960 crore rupees. By the 10th plan in the early 2000s, it was nearly 16 lakh crore. And then the 11th plan outlay was placed at over 36 lakh crore, literally more than double the already massive 10th plan. The sheer scale of that kind of economic ambition practically guarantees spending growth. But here's the catch. Governments aren't just spending more overall. They are fundamentally shifting how they spend it. Back in 1950, development expenditure was about 36% of total expenditure in India. By 2015, it had jumped to nearly 60%. Governments are clearly giving a much higher priority to active development, building the infrastructure of the future, things like roads, railways, and energy production, rather than just maintaining the status quo. And one of the biggest catalysts for all this infrastructure spending? It's hidden right in this number, 31.2%. That was India's urban population percentage in 2011. Now, compare that to just 17.3% back in 1951. Rapid urbanization means millions of people moving into concentrated areas all at once. And that creates an immediate, massive demand for new civil administration, public health facilities, water supply systems, parks, you name it. Basically, urbanization is incredibly expensive. Which brings us to a final provocative thought. We've seen how spending has evolved from providing basic physical security to funding complex human capital development. So as the modern welfare state continues to expand and global urbanization just accelerates, How will we define what is truly essential government spending in the future? What will be considered a basic right funded by the public purse 20, maybe 50 years from now? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this gives you a clearer, more structured way to think about exactly where your tax dollars are going and why those national budgets look the way they do. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.